Some people spend their whole lives trying to please everyone. They say yes to avoid conflict, say sure to avoid tension, say it's fine, while falling apart inside. You know why? Because they were taught that standing up for yourself is rude, that setting boundaries is selfish, that defending your space creates problems. But here's a truth no one likes to say out loud. If you don't respect yourself, no one else will. People notice when you don't value yourself, when you swallow your words, lower your head, accept crumbs. And guess what? They get used to it. They start treating you exactly the way you allow. The world reads your boundaries like a sign. If it's blank, anyone parks wherever they want. Stay with me until the end of this story, because maybe what you're missing isn't the courage to scream, but the courage to say no with calm firmness and still sleep peacefully. Rachel was one of those people who always fixed everything. At work, she was the one who stayed late. At home, she cleaned up after her siblings' messes. Among friends, she was the designated listener. She learned from a young age that love was earned by being useful, being available, being agreeable. She was sweet, loved, and exhausted. It started subtly. A coworker who dumped his tasks on her saying, "You're better at this than I am." An ex-boyfriend who disappeared for days and came back with a sad excuse. A friend who only called to vent, never to ask how Rachel was doing. At first, she thought it was bad luck. Then she thought it was her fault. Eventually, she thought it was just normal. One day on her 31st birthday, she decided to host a simple dinner. She invited 8 people, bought wine, made lasagna, prepared everything with care. By 8 p.m., the table was set. By 8:30, 2 people canceled by message. 3 didn't reply. 2 showed up over an hour late. Only 1 friend arrived on time and brought a small cake. That night, while washing the dishes alone, Rachel had an uncomfortable thought. I put in so much effort, and it feels like no one cares. But the next day, as always, she said nothing. She replied with emojis, laughed at the late messages, said it was fine. And inside, it wasn't. The truth was, she was fed up, but didn't know how to change things without hurting others. She was afraid of sounding ungrateful, rude, or difficult. Until something small happened. A coworker asked her to finish an urgent report. It wasn't hers, but he needed to leave early. She smiled, said, "Sure," and did it. At the end of the day, the boss praised the report, and the coworker took the credit. Rachel stayed quiet, but that night lying in bed, she thought, what if I had said no? The next day, the same coworker tried again. "Rachel, could you—" She took a deep breath and replied, "Not today." He laughed, made a joke, said she was acting weird. But he left, and she stayed. The world didn't collapse. No one yelled, no one slammed a door, and she felt relieved. Little by little, she started setting small boundaries, stopped replying to messages in the middle of the night, started speaking up when someone flaked on her, said no to invitations she didn't want to accept. She lost a friend. A cousin grew distant. A coworker stopped chatting. And for the first time, Rachel felt light. She didn't become harsh or arrogant. She was still kind, but now also kind to herself. She replaced "I need to please" with "I need to respect myself." And everything changed. Rachel realized that no one values someone who doesn't value themselves, that if you always lower your head, you become the floor, that being a good person isn't enough. You also need to be clear. You have to teach others how to treat you, through action. We go through life hoping people will respect us instinctively. But respect isn't guesswork. It's built. It's limits spoken out loud. It's this I accept, and this I don't. There's a saying, you teach people how to treat you by what you allow. And it's true. When you never complain, it looks like everything's fine. When you don't react, it seems like you agree. When you forgive someone who hasn't changed, it looks like you approve. And over time, people get used to you getting used to it. Rachel spent years believing that saying yes was her best quality. She thought it was beautiful to give in, took pride in being dependable. And for a while, That worked. But the more she said yes to others, the more she was saying no to herself. Before she knew it, her days were packed with obligations she hadn't chosen. It was as if her life had become a calendar where only others could write. There was a time when she'd say, of course, before even thinking. If a coworker needed help after hours, she was already opening her laptop. If someone called in the middle of the night to vent, she picked up, even when she had no energy. And every time, her biggest fear was seeming mean, selfish, cold. But little by little, she started to realize that kindness without boundaries becomes self-abandonment. That constantly giving in isn't a virtue. It's a silent cry from someone afraid of losing affection. Rachel was afraid of being forgotten, of being replaced, of being seen as someone hard to love. So she did everything she could to be the easiest person to be around, even if that meant living with her own frustration every single day. There was one conversation that hit especially hard. It happened during an online therapy session. The therapist said, "Rachel, you keep asking others to respect you with your words, but your actions teach them the opposite." It hit her deep, because it was true. She said she wanted to be valued, but gave herself away like someone who didn't believe she was worth anything. That's when she started making small internal shifts. First, she began asking herself before saying yes, "Do I want this? Or am I just trying to avoid rejection?" Then she began observing herself. She noticed her body tensed up every time she agreed to something she didn't want. Her stomach would ache after certain conversations. Her silence had a cost, so she began practicing a new skill, the discomfort of putting herself first. At first it felt wrong, but slowly she realized that respecting herself wasn't hurting anyone. It was taking care of herself. That saying no was sometimes the greatest act of self-love, and that anyone who walked away because she started valuing herself had already been gone for a long time. One of the hardest moments came with her own mother. For years, Rachel had done everything to keep the family peace. She was the one who listened to her mother's venting, even when she was barely holding herself up. The one who called her uncles on their birthdays. The one who kept the family group chats alive with cheerful messages. But one day, after hearing for the third time, "You're always so available. That's why I come to you," she heard the weight hidden in that sentence. Being always available wasn't a virtue. It was a trap. Because the same availability that made her dependable also made her invisible. People went to Rachel not because they respected her, but because they knew she wouldn't say no. And the hardest part was realizing that deep down, she had used herself the same way. She used caring for others to avoid looking at herself. Because when she stopped, she felt a kind of emptiness that was hard to face. A silence that asked for decisions, truths, confrontations. So she filled her time helping, fixing, giving in. It was easier to manage the world than to face her own mess. Until one Saturday, she canceled all her plans, logged off social media, made herself a coffee and sat on the porch doing absolutely nothing. At first she felt guilty. Then, a wave of relief so strong came over her. She cried without knowing why. And in that cry she realized just how many times she had abandoned herself just to feel accepted. Respecting herself, she discovered, was a process. It didn't happen overnight. There were setbacks, doubts, fears. But every small no said with firmness was like a brick in the rebuilding of her identity. And every time she chose herself, a new piece of freedom was born. Rachel realized that respect starts in the details, in turning down a favor when she's exhausted, in not laughing at jokes that hurt, in not accepting invitations loaded with obligation, in not over-explaining her decisions, in not apologizing for simply existing. And the most beautiful part, she noticed that when she started respecting herself, some people drifted away, but others came closer. New people. People who admired her stance. People who offered the same thing she had finally learned to give herself. Care, presence, truth. She discovered that real love doesn't demand constant sacrifice. That friendship shouldn't drain your energy. That real partnership honors space, time, and boundaries. And so, step by step, Rachel stopped being a supporting role in her own life. She became the main character of her story. Some people think that self-respect means pushing others away, that saying no is cutting ties, that putting yourself first is selfish. But Rachel learned the opposite is true. Only when you respect yourself do your relationships become more genuine. Only when you prioritize yourself can you offer something that truly comes from the heart, not from exhaustion. She remembers the day she ran into an old college friend, Emily, who said, "You seem different, more confident, more centered." Rachel smiled. She didn't explain everything. The quiet tears, the swallowed words, the hard-earned silence. She just said, "I've learned not to abandon myself anymore." And that was enough, because once you start respecting yourself, you no longer need to justify your peace. It simply arrives. It radiates in your tone of voice, your posture, your way of moving through life. Rachel still has bad days. Sometimes she slips, feels tempted to please again, to give in out of fear of losing someone. But now she notices it sooner, takes a deep breath, shows herself compassion, and returns to center. Because she learned that no one will respect you if you live in constant conflict with yourself. Today she looks back and sees the woman who once believed she had to reshape herself to be accepted, and she feels tenderness, because that woman endured everything necessary so this new version could be born. So if you're somewhere in the middle, if you still feel torn between pleasing others and honoring yourself, between keeping everyone else's peace and finding your own, know this: you're not alone. Most of us learn this late, but it's never too late. The peace you're looking for begins the moment you say, "Enough." And that enough doesn't have to be shouted. It just needs to be firm, consistent, held over time. Because respect isn't a single act, it's a daily choice. And once you begin to make that choice, the world starts responding differently. You attract people who don't want to use you, but walk beside you. You create space to rest. You learn to silence what doesn't deserve your energy. And finally, you start hearing your own voice. And what a beautiful voice it is. The one that rises when you stop silencing yourself just to fit into someone else's space. Today, when Rachel looks in the mirror, she no longer sees someone trying to prove her worth. She sees someone who knows her worth. Someone who doesn't try to fit in. She takes her place. Who doesn't settle for less. She chooses better. Who doesn't disappear. She stands tall. And this woman who once lived trying to please everyone, now lives in peace with her own company. Because she finally understood. If you don't respect yourself, no one will. If this story spoke to you, leave a comment down below. Tell me, what boundary do you need to start setting? And if this video could help someone who keeps losing themselves to please others, share it with them. Oh, and don't forget to like the video so this message reaches more people. I'll see you in the next one. Until then.